A little bit about myself. This is a subject that is personal, pistol packing preachers, because on San Jacinto Day this year will be the 30th anniversary. I graduated from the police academy on San Jacinto Day, and that was 30 years ago. So, and coming up also this summer is my 20-year anniversary to my ordination to the clergy, the Episcopal Diocese of West Texas. So I have run concurrently for 20 years being a pistol-packing preacher. There hasn't been one day of my ordained life that I haven't been in a pulpit with a firearm. And I used to kind of think that that was more of a novelty until I started realizing that even 20 years ago, there was an average of one church shooting every Sunday in the United States, usually regarding domestic disturbance that overflowed into the church parking lot, but you can get the idea. So this is what I do. I've been I retired from Tom Green County Sheriff's Office 2 years ago after 28 years of paid law enforcement. I've been, like I said, I've told you, been a priest for 20 years. My majority of my retirement time comes out of Seguin, Texas. I was a captain with the Texas Lutheran University Police Department. So there's a figure in my talk that carries the rank Reverend Captain, and that's near and dear to my heart because that's my same title. So without further ado, I just want to let everybody know this is what a pistol-packing preacher would have probably worn. They would have had their primary firearm. They probably would have had a backup firearm. These are actual replicas of the Colt firearms. This is a Navy 1851 Navy Colt revolver, chambered in, supposed to be 36 caliber, but I don't like switching calibers, so it's chambered in 44. And then this is a 32 caliber 1858 Colt pocket revolver. So that's what they probably would have actually more or less carried the smaller one, because that would have been the primary backup off-duty carry thing that most people could afford to carry. Some of the other guys, if they were also a deputy sheriff or served in the military, they would have carried the military firearm, which was the Colt Navy revolver. But these are black powder. They are not capped. There's no cap nipple on the caps. There's no powder in the chambers. There's no ball in the chamber, so they're basically inert. So just more for props. So today I wanted to cover about 3 gentlemen that I've found to be very interesting. We're going to go in chronological order of their life and their existence. Being Episcopalian, I wanted to really kind of go into some of those guys, but you know, they always say the joke about the Episcopal Church and the evangelization of the West. You know, the Spanish came early on and evangelized the Indians, and then the Baptists came and they evangelized the Texas settlements, the early Texas settlements, and then the Presbyterians came around a little bit, and the Episcopalians didn't come until there was a first-class Pullman coach on the Southern Pacific. But we're going to start today with a gentleman named, I love his name. I mean, who couldn't be a preacher without this name? Zachariah Nehemiah Morell. That's pretty weighty biblical name there. He's born in South Carolina in 1803. Spends his time in South Carolina farming, ranching, gets the call to ministry, has several churches that he goes and preaches at in South Carolina and later Tennessee. And then somebody shows up around the time of 1835 and says, hey, they're giving away free land in Texas. And so this is the time period of all the land grants when Mexico had invited the Texans, or really anybody, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, invited all of those folks to come in and settle what was at the time the state of Tejas y Coahuila. So that was going on at the time. Stephen F. Austin and the land grants, the impresarios, that's this time frame. So you've got this influx of Anglo-Americans coming in to Texas to settle, and he was one of them. It was a good opportunity for land and cattle, so that's what he did. Quite often, you know, you heard you would see the GTT, not a phone company anymore, but it was gone to Texas, and people would just leave that sign hanging up on their door, just a simple GTT, gone to Texas. Now I got to do this because I went to seminary in Swanee, Tennessee, and I was there for 3 years. And again, I was also a part-time officer with the Swanee Police Department. But when I graduated and I was being told I was going to get placed at the church in McAllen, Texas, at St. John's McAllen, I got a big old sheet of cardboard and I put it up on my study carrel office and I just put GTT. So this gentleman is pretty significant because, and I'll save a little bit of surprise for the end why he's significant, but this guy comes and establishes some of the very first early Baptist churches in Texas. Actually, not some of, he established the first Baptist churches in Texas. We had just come back from a trip, and it's the second time we went to Independence, Texas, and Washington on the Brazos. My son's a sophomore at A&M in the Corps of Cadets, so it's Aggie Parents Weekend, and last year we went about the same time, and this year we made our second trip. Except this time we were armed with information from last time about what was going on in Washington on the Brazos and the family connections there and the relations that we have to this area. So it was neat to go back and know that relatives, Donna's and mine, were both in the area. She has German relatives that were in Washington County. I have relatives through the Hunt family that actually lived and worked in Washington on the Brazos. So it was neat to see that. Well, here we go, and we find this gentleman. Many people called him Wildcat Morel. Some people called him a cane breaker from the type of grass that was growing at the time. It was a very rich grass full of nutrients that cattle just loved. And so it was great for grazing. And of course, farming it, instead of sod buster, they call them cane busters. So that was the name that he was given. So this area, which at the time they called Falls on the Brazos. If you go out there and look, it's been dammed now many times, but before it was improved, there was waterfalls out there. So the area of Washington on the Brazos was called Falls on the Brazos. And that's the area that he settled in. He had no formal education, no real theological education, but over time he became one of Texas's earliest and best preachers, bringing that Baptist theology to the area and bringing that gospel to the folks that built that part of the country. The neat thing about it was, not to downplay the Roman Catholicism that was also present during the time, but if you came into Texas, you had to be a Mexican citizen. You had to swear an oath to the government of Mexico and become Roman Catholic. Well, a lot of folks did that just in name only, just to get into Texas. But one of the things that I found out through my research is that it was expensive to get married in the Roman Catholic Church. To have a wedding be officially recognized and legal, you had to pay the priest $5. Which in 1835, 1836 was a lot of money. I think that if I did the mental calculations, probably pretty close to $50 or $100. So that's expensive, not to mention everything else that goes with the wedding. So they had to pay the priest $5. Well, Reverend Morel came in and said, I don't need that. Just find me a Bible and let's find us a nice tree and a back porch. And he started marrying folks. And so that was one of the initial things that was going on and drawing people to the area and to the Baptist church. We actually got to, we didn't go this time, but we actually were in the actual old church that he established way back in 1841. So he's a neat character. He goes on to establish, let's see, in 1844, Huntsville, 1845, Washington on the Brazos, 1849, Little River, which is in Milam County, Marlin, the church in Marlin, 1851. So he's pretty busy. He's one of those early Baptist circuit riding preachers, going around and establishing different places. He gets married twice, and you might think this is interesting. His first wife bore him 4 children and unfortunately died. His second wife, they were married 15 years. And, well, I've started to realize these circuit riding preachers, a lot of times, they're usually on horseback alone, so they're not home very much. So what I found out is that after 15 years of him just not ever being home except for maybe like Christmas and Easter, she left him. Just got tired and said, that's enough. And I've seen that through some of these other circuit riding preachers. Some of them complete their full long marriage, but you know, they're never home. Nobody's there to like change the light bulb or, you know, help with the unload the wagon or fix a leaky faucet. You know, they're not home. A lot of them are on the road a lot. So unfortunately, that's what happened with him. So he carries the title pistol packing preacher because in a lot of cases, these gentlemen needed it for protection. They're on the road, they're on horseback, they're traveling hundreds of miles on, you know, to visit their congregations. And we're talking Texas in like 1836, 1840, 1841. I mean, the Indians hadn't even been subdued yet. They're still Native Americans fighting for their land and running into these Anglo-Americans that are trying to settle and, you know, get off my land, and the shootout starts. Also keep in mind, you know, it's not like this day and age where, you know, animals usually see us and run in fear. Animals are like, you're in my land too. You might have an attack from a wild animal, so these guys have to defend themselves. And also keep in mind, this is lawless country. This is a time period where there's just no law. You might, in a larger community, like maybe around Austin or Galveston, you might have some city marshal, but out there between Hebronville and Galveston, you know, wherever, there's nobody. So the only law that you have is the 5 empty or the 5 loaded chambers in your 6-shot revolver. That's about it. And they refer to several times. They talk about, you know, in the writings, well, I had all 6 chambers loaded for this one. Well, one of the things that these guys knew and did is if you ever work with single action revolvers, if you load all 6 chambers up, they didn't have any safeties back then. You could just drop the gun. It's simply just, you know, just beat the butt on the table, and that hammer is resting on the primer. And so if it hits it hard enough, that bullet's going to discharge. So a lot of these guys would carry an empty chamber under the hammer in case they dropped it or they're bouncing around on horseback or something or whatever, so they wouldn't shoot themselves. But when they say, for this one I loaded all 6 chambers, it meant they were going into battle. They wanted to have all 6 chambers ready to go and stack the odds as best they can in their favor. So I've seen that come up several times in here where they'll make reference to, oh, it was a long night. I had all 6 chambers loaded. So he is a pistol-packing preacher because one reason out of self-defense, but also because during this time period was the raid, the Comanche raid on the town of Linville in 1840, and just sacked the town. I mean, it's something that we don't hear about too much, but they came in and raided everything and took prisoners and ran off with them. So, of course, you know, the Texians are, you know, we want our people back. So what ensues shortly after is the Battle of Plum Creek, and that's a whole talk in and of itself. But it was when the Comanche under Buffalo Hump came in and went to battle with the Texans. About 1,000 Indians, from what I can tell, against about 200 Texans, later rising to about 500 Texans. And he was right there with them. He was right there in the middle with them. He fought with some of the well-known people at the time, Colonel Burleson, Jack Hayes, Ben McCullough. A lot of these guys all knew each other. They were all friends. A lot of them even went to church together. So in a sense, he takes on the role as the early chaplain to the Texas militia. In a lot of cases, he will be out there with his men and the campfires, kind of calming them down, praying with them, and then when the fighting starts, picks up his gun and is standing shoulder to shoulder with these gentlemen. And then afterward, in many cases, with not just him, but with others, as soon as this fighting's over, drops his weapon and goes around and starts taking care of wounds, praying with wounded soldiers, and providing that pastoral care to the folks that he just fought shoulder to shoulder with. So this battle goes on for a bit. The Native Americans ended up retreating, not so much because they were whipped, they definitely outnumbered the Texians, but because they wanted to try to keep their captives from getting freed. So they would draw from the battle. The Texans claim it as a victory. They're like, oh, we held the field, but luckily the Native Americans retreated at about the right time. So in and all that, he goes on again to establish another church in 1871, and again at another church in 1853. Now the interesting thing about him is he also, without having any formal education, he's basically self-educated and self-taught, goes on to be on the board of education of the Baptist church that helped establish Baylor University. So, I mean, he's got his hand in every part of church polity. He's well known, he's popular, he's well liked. He even goes on a missionary trip to Honduras. So he is very, very active in his life. Now here's the thing that I was going to leave to the end on him is he's pretty significant in Texas history because Sam Houston had refused to get baptized all these years, and at the age of 61, finally turns to his friend, Preacher Morrell, and says, I think I'm finally ready. So he picks himself out two other favorite Baptist preachers, and they go down to that little church that we visited in Independence, Texas, to get baptized. Except when they're getting ready to go in and do the baptism, they slide the cover off the baptismal font, and a bunch of kids the night before had filled it up with twigs and sticks and dirt. So they quickly have a makeshift plan, and they go down to the river about a mile away, and he gets baptized in a place called Baptismal Hole. It's a little creek, but there's a spot in the middle where it's deeper, and so they waddle down into that, and Sam Houston gets baptized by these three Baptist preachers. So that was pretty neat little thing that I found. His last words, his last request was that he be buried in a pine box, a simple plain pine box, and on the top of it, on this stone, an inscription that says, "A sinner saved by grace." And he passed away and died in 1883 at the age of 80. So a pretty long, fulfilling career. My next guy is one that I think everybody here in San Angelo is pretty familiar with. Born in 1830, lived to 1895, the Reverend Andrew Jackson Potter, which most people call Fightin' Jack Potter. He's got another interesting career, another interesting life, and one of our own, but he's not from here. He was born in Missouri, in Charlton County, Missouri, in April 1830. He's named Andrew Jackson Palmer because his father fought in the War of 1812 under Andrew Jackson and just loved him so much, he named his son after him. But unfortunately, his father doesn't live very long. At about the age of 10, he dies. He dies of an illness. Early, people didn't live too long back then if they weren't lucky. So he dies early on, and the family is just destitute. I mean, his mother has like 12 kids. And so the family just starts to split apart. The mother takes 4 or 5 kids. The others are a little bit older, and so they trek out on their own. And he, at the age of 10, is just an orphan. Just has to kind of figure out where to go and what to do and be. And he's a small kid, kind of wiry-framed. But the interesting thing is he quickly figures out that he's good at riding horses. So he signs on with a gentleman who owns racehorses and becomes a jockey. So from the age of 10 to the age of 16, he gets into the horse racing industry. And of course, in the horse racing industry, there's a couple other things that people like to do, like drink and gamble and run around. And so he gets really good at that. But at the age of 16, he's starting to age out of this. He weighs more. His horses aren't winning as much. And so basically his owner lets him go and said, you're too old. I need smaller, more lighter framed guys. So now he's trying to figure out what to do with his life again. He's really good at shooting. He's really good at riding horses. He's also, ironically, gotten very good at writing and reading and has self-educated himself and has a desire to go out and learn and study. And from what most people say, at an early age, he could write a pretty good letter. But in all this, he realizes where the money is. The money is in commerce and transportation. So he learns how to be a teamster. He learns how to lead and guide oxen. And at the time, there's a lot of commerce and trade moving around. He's from up north. There's a lot of north-south traffic going on, so he becomes a teamster. At one point, he decides to sign on with the Army. he goes into he goes under the command of General Sterling Price and serves 5 years. And the poor guy at the time is just not very big. He's too big to be a jockey, but not big enough to be a soldier. They say that the rifle with the bayonet on and the musket with the bayonet on was taller than he was. So he just, I read stuff where he would try to shoulder it and it was dragging on the ground, which is not really good as a soldier. You can't really be dragging your firearm around. He couldn't carry the haversack. If you put 2 canteens on him and shot and lead and everything else, he just couldn't carry the weight. But the Army noticed that he was good with animals. So the Army made use of his teamster skills. So he became a teamster for the Army, and he goes along with General Sterling Price. This is during the Mexican War, and they make their way to El Paso by way of Santa Fe. One of the things that he quickly realizes is that he has a knack and a compassion for wounded soldiers. So when they stop at different field hospitals along the way, or after there's been a battle or engagement with the Mexican Army, he finds himself tending to wounded soldiers. He self-teaches himself basic medical skills. He goes in and changes bandages. He is able to clean wounds and start doing some of that basic triaging or first aid on the battlefield, and then helping them get to the field hospital. And is almost in a conflict, like, should I be in this helping field, but I really want to be a soldier? And you could see that early tension of him, like, what should I do? You know, this is what I feel called to do. And then eventually he starts taking that next step about, somebody's like, laying on their deathbed, like, am I going to die? Am I going to die? Should I give my life to Christ? And he leads and prays with them and talks with them through that. But yet, here's General Sterling Price getting ready to shove off for the next post, and he's in conflict. Should I do this, or should I go with them? I know a little bit about that. So eventually he does go with the Army and stays with them. He has to get out of the Army because he gets sick. He gets very sick. As a matter of fact, these health ailments stay with him for quite a while, and he spends quite a significant amount of time in a hospital, almost to the point of death. What he had made and saved as a teamster and what he had kept from his Army pay got to be a pretty good amount. But he goes through this illness, almost dies, and basically bankrupts himself from medical bills. Just doctor visit after doctor visit after doctor visit. But he's determined to recover from that. And the other neat thing I found out about his character is he does go into debt. He does eventually run out of money and has to go off credit to pay for his medical expenses. Well, he, in his mind, is not going to be a burden on anybody. So again, he takes up being a teamster and goes out and earns that money and pays off his debt, which I thought was a pretty neat characteristic for somebody of that day. It's during that time frame that he has started to realize, I've got a calling. I've got something that I can't get rid of. And I know what that feels like, because when I was in the service at Texas Lutheran University Police Department, well, when you're going to run from a calling, don't go to a Christian university campus. That's number one. And so I had been feeling this since I was about maybe 10 years old, 11 years old, feeling that draw to the ministry. My family is, well, I would say 5th generation Episcopalian, but we go all the way back to Jamestown Colony in southern England in the Anglican Church, so generationally Anglican Episcopalian. And so I had several different priests in my life that I was drawn to. They one of them liked trains, another one was former military. So these were things traits that I thought, oh, you don't just have to be a bookworm. And so I made a deal with God. I said, all right, I'll do it. I'll go to seminary. But I'll go to seminary after I make the rank of captain, because I figured that's where I wanted to get to in my law enforcement career, and most people that make that rank are usually almost out the door to retirement, so I thought, I'll do that. And I locked myself in the university chapel that night, made this deal with God, and for the first time in about 15 years, I felt at peace. It was as if God said, okay. And I walked out and I thought, oh, okay, all right, this is the plan. About a year later, my chief slides a sheet of paper across his desk and says, turn that over and read it. And I did, and it says, hereby, on this such date, you are hereby promoted to the rank of captain. And I said, boss, there's 2 other people that are senior to me. What about them? And he said, are you the blankety blank chief of police? No, sir. Then shut up. And then, a few months after that, my bishop called and said, I've affirmed your calling to go to seminary. You have a year to get your life ready to move. So you can see how he must have felt, seeing this conflict. Do I stay in this helping profession, or do I go do the fun stuff? Do I go off in the army? Do I go off and explore? Or should I do this? And it manifests one night when he is drawn to this Methodist tent preacher, the gentleman named, I never could find his real first name, but it's I.G. John. Most people just called him Preacher John. So he goes in and listens to this Methodist tent preacher and is just drawn in, so much to the extent where he starts hanging around this guy, and they build a relationship and a friendship. And eventually he goes to many of his other tent meetings. Well, there's one evening where he's a cowboy now. He's thrown in and he's a cowboy. And so he and his cowboy buddies hear this guy, and he says, hey, I know this guy. Let's go listen to him. He's pretty good. Well, cowboys don't really want to do that. They want to go to the saloon and drink. So he convinces them to go along, which it really wasn't convincing. They wanted to go along because they were going to heckle the preacher John and make fun of him. He didn't know that, though. He thought he had talked them into going. So they all show up, and they're about halfway through Preacher John's sermon. They start heckling him. And here was the definitive change in his life, in fighting Potter's life. He gets up, walks up, stands in front of Preacher John, turns around, faces his buddies, and says, you better quieten down or you'll have to answer to me. And he felt the change happen, and that's when he knew he had to pursue his calling to be a clergyman. So it's funny because this part about fighting Jack Potter I took from Barbara Burton's book, Pistol Packin' Preachers, which is where I got the name of the talk today. She writes this about him. She says, the man who raced horses as a kid, chased cattle as a teenager, driven wagons as a man, suddenly found himself studying long hours at night with the help of a coal oil lamp. Well, that was the change that happened. He went back to Preacher John and he said, I want to be a preacher. And so he trained him how to write sermons, how to do research, how to do exegesis, how to look into the commentaries, and how to build a good sermon. And he does pretty good. He eventually gets married. He marries a lady named Emily Gwynn in 1852. They have kids. He totally changes his lifestyle. He goes from being a wild, crazy cowboy to a Methodist circuit preacher. Except a little bitty thing gets in the way in 1861. Is the war between the states. So being a Texan, he enlists as the chaplain to the 32nd Texas Cavalry. He is a private in Wood's Cavalry and is part of the Red River Campaign, and eventually also serves in the 27th Texas Cavalry. He is one of those also that will go pray with his men when they're anxious and nervous before going into battle, to quieten them down, to give them confidence and calm their spirit, and then pick up a musket and shoot right next to them. And then as soon as the fighting's over, he's back dressing wounds, praying with men that have been wounded or scared, and is right there with them. One of the interesting things about him is he's pretty fiery. At one point, they're in Brownsville, Texas. They've been assigned to garrison Brownsville, Texas. And a lot of times when they would march in, most Texas towns, everybody comes out and they throw food at them and they cheer, and there's a band and everybody's happy. And then at some point, there's something positive in the local town paper. The 32nd Texas Cavalry is here, and we're glad that they're here and we support them. Except this particular editor of this Brownsville paper writes some negative stuff about his regiment. And it really makes him upset. So upset to the extent where he goes into the editor's office, kicks in the door, grabs the guy by the scruff of the neck, and starts pounding on him. And then he throws him outside his office and gets ready to take a baseball bat and threatens to go break the printing press. And about that time, his other comrades have gotten wind of this, and they thought, oh gosh, Jack Potter's mad. So they go in and they restrain him and they drag him out, one of which I think was General Sterling Price himself. So they know he's a hothead, and that's one of the ways he gets his name, Fighting Jack Potter, because he's not going to take anything from anybody. But he's known for that, and it plays about in a really significant way later on here in San Angelo. But he is one of those early Methodist circuit riding preachers. He eventually gets licensed by the Methodist Church to be a preacher, and his circuit in 1866 is Kerrville, Bandera, Mason, Brady, Bernie, Uvalde, and a lot of times he only had with him a Bible, a hymnal, a change of clothes, a top coat, and his rifle and pistol. He is well known by 1872 to the extent where even the U.S. Congress says this: remove your regulars from the garrison at the Texas border. Commission Jack Potter, and a reclaimed desperado and now Methodist preacher and Indian fighter. Instruct him to choose and organize 100 men, and the Indian problem will be no longer. So they had that much confidence in him that he could get the job done. Oh, I better move this along. I thought I was going to... Felt like I needed some more time. Well, let me fast forward to San Angelo. In 1880, he moves to San Angelo, which, in his words, San Angelo was a raunchy place. He moves his family in, and at the time, there's just dozens and dozens of bars and saloons. It's a military town. It's also a cattle town, and so it attracts the worst of everybody. When you get guys that are just alone, and you have a surplus of whiskey, it's just not a good combination. And so he comes into this town where it's a ruckus. He walks into the nearest bar he can find and asks permission if he can have a sermon there. And so they give him permission. So he makes a makeshift church out of it. They get a bunch of 2x12s and empty beer kegs and make pews. And then he grabs a whiskey box and puts it up on a table as a makeshift pulpit. According to rumor, some unregenerative sinners have bragged around town that they're going to break up this meeting. Maybe they will, but I guarantee one thing: there will be a bunch of them. They will be a bunch of sick roosters before it gets done. His son even steps up and says, "Daddy was called the fighting parson because he stayed when all the other preachers ran away scared." So he walks into this bar, and puts his 2 pistols up on the pulpit, and says what he just said. So you could say he had the first Methodist sermon in San Angelo. After a while, he builds a congregation, but they don't have any place to meet other than the bar. So he decides to plant a church and puts it out that he's going to build the first Methodist church in San Angelo, which he does. But his little congregation, puts together a few $100s, not enough to build a church. So he goes into the Blue Goose Saloon, and can you imagine? He goes into the Blue Goose Saloon with his hat, and goes up to everybody that's drinking and said, "Could you spare some money?" Gets his pistol out. "Could you spare some money for the church?" so, I don't know. Maybe that might work for me. So he has a pretty good collection, but not quite enough. So the bar owner says, "Well, let's go upstairs." And he says, "What's upstairs?" "Don't say anything, but let's go upstairs." So they go upstairs, and that's where all the gambling is. So the bar proprietor takes him around, and he does the same thing, and the bar proprietor says, "This here is Preacher Jack. He's building a church. I'm sure some of y'all have some extra money to spare," and he gets the rest of the amount that he needs to build a church. So, geez, I wish he was Episcopalian, because that'd be a great story we could tell. But that is the beginning of the Methodist Church in San Angelo. So he is a neat character. He is somebody that is just just one of those people that is just so colorful. In 1895, he's preaching in Caldwell County, and he says this as he's preaching: "I think I have heard my last sermon. I am going home, I believe." And when he finishes, he literally falls down on the ground and dies. What a way to go as a preacher. He's buried in Lockhart, Texas. He and Emily remained married, and they had 14 kids. Now, I cut out a lot of his different circuit riding. He was all over. They moved him from different circuit districts, but basically he was never home. But when he was home, okay, so my last guy tonight, or this afternoon, is a pastor called Pierre Bernard Hill, 1877 to 1958. He was born in Richmond, Virginia, and died in San Antonio, Texas. I had this set up different. I have to go to the middle and then back up to the beginning. So he comes to San Antonio, or he comes to Texas in 1921, moves in. It's interesting that all these pistol-packing Texas preachers are not from here. They're from somewhere else, and they move in, which kind of reminds us, I always like to say, if it wasn't for Tennessee, there wouldn't be a Texas. But it reflects that because of the movement towards Texas. People are drawn to this place because of what we have and the environment and the land and the culture, and they all end up here. And they bring all their beauty and their culture and their colorful personalities and become Texans. But he's a Presbyterian, so he's well-versed and educated in Presbyterianism and Calvinism. He brings his theological education with him. It's talked about how in Virginia and Tennessee, and South Carolina, he preached to the Gentile culture. So this is a big step for him to come out here. And he comes out here in a time when it's still kind of the Old West. We have an Episcopalian, y'all probably have heard of him, Brother Mercer. Brother Mercer came from England in 1900 and lived here until 1925. And the stories I hear about him, he's been at every church that I've been at. He had a horse and buggy. He had a coal oil lamp. And this is in the early 1900s, so it's still the Wild West out here at the time. And he lives and experiences some of that. Let's see if I can try and wrap him up pretty quickly. He goes on to be the first radio preacher in the United States. The first time a preacher got on the radio and put a sermon out there on the airwaves. And being from New Braunfels, Texas, it's WOAI out of San Antonio, and so that's the big radio station, AM radio station for us out there. And so when they said WOAI, I'm like, I know that radio station. So he goes on and does this. He establishes a church in San Antonio. Not established, he's preaching at the First Presbyterian Church in San Antonio, and is drawn to public service. He's well known to be somebody that is very, very amicable, very friendly, very approachable. He's very trustworthy. I mean, that's his town reputation, even among people that aren't Presbyterian. He builds a really close, tight-knit ministerial alliance, so he is in good favor with the Episcopalians, the Baptists, the Catholics, the Lutherans. They all just bond together, and he builds a really cohesive ministerial alliance. There is one occasion where, keep in mind, this is San Antonio in the 1920s, Prohibition. You've got several military bases on hand. There's lots of commerce, lots of oil money going around. And the good, quiet citizens of San Antonio just kind of wanted to ignore that over in Alamo Heights and let the other parts just kind of run amok. Except when it spills over into the genteel parts of town, they get irritated and they want to go to the chief of police and raise a ruckus. And all the ministerial alliances gathered together, and they're going to go protest and stand in the mayor's office and demand the chief of police do something. Well, he's friends with the chief of police. So he gets the ministerial alliance to kind of calm down. They said, can you give me one day? So they say, okay. He goes up, talks to his chief of police friend, and says, they're getting ready to storm the doors. And they're going to put stuff in the newspapers and start petitions and rally and protest if we don't do something. So they get with the city commissioner and the chief of police, and they come up with a plan to slowly start reining things in, and it's successful. And he goes back and he tells them this, and everything starts to calm down. So you can see already he's one of these people that's a negotiator, somebody that's able to appeal to many people outside of his own denomination. And through this, he also becomes friends with a Texas Ranger captain. He's drawn to this law enforcement thing, and it's easy to him, and it's natural to him. And long story short, because I know we're running out of time, his ranger captain takes him to Ma Ferguson, governor of Texas, and she says, well, there's no provision for the legislature to name or appoint a chaplain to the Rangers. Let's just go ahead and make him a ranger, and what you want to do with them is up to you. So Ma Ferguson commissions him as a ranger, a Texas Ranger, and he becomes an actual sworn commissioned Texas Ranger. And he just isn't a guy who's just going to go out and ride around with the guys, when they're looking good on parade or something. If there's a serious call, a manhunt, a bank robbery, he's mounted on horseback and right with them in the middle of everything. If there's a bank threat holdup, he's right there standing with his rifle guarding the bank. If they're out in the field trying to defend against renegade Native Americans or bandits, he's right there with them in the midst of everything, to the extent where he will say, he's one of the ones that says, I had all 6 chambers loaded for this one. He looked like the quintessential Texas Ranger. They don't have a uniform, not even to this day, but everybody knows one when you see one, and that's what he looked like. So he was right there in the middle of all of this. The interesting thing about him, and I'll probably have to bring more up about him at a later time because I know we're running late, he goes on to, I don't know if any of y'all ever heard of the big cowboy camp meeting around Hunt, Texas. He was the initiator of that. He founded that. So that was something that's really neat about his legacy. One of the other neat things about his legacy is his children. Let me see, I got it here on one of these back pages. Okay, have y'all ever heard of Sam Hill? Sam Hill, like what the Sam Hill? Sam Hill is his son. Sam Hill is his son, who later went on to be a colonel in the United States Air Force, and later a well-regarded, Presbyterian pastor. His other son, David Hill, have y'all ever heard of the Flying Tigers? The U.S. pilots that went and fought in China during World War II. His son, David, was a Flying Tiger and later went on in the United States Air Force as a colonel also. So he has a pretty neat family, pretty interesting character. Later on in his career, he's actually promoted to captain, so he carries the title, the Reverend Captain Pierre Hill. So I was really drawn and attracted to him. He eventually died and was buried in San Antonio. But one of the last stories I wanted to share about him is there was he was sitting, and I've had this many times, you're sitting at home, quiet, nothing going on, and the phone rings. Pick up the phone. There's another police officer on the other end that says, "Are you busy?" Well, that happens. San Antonio police detective called him and said, "Are you busy?" And he said, "No." And he said, "We've got to go find somebody. We've got somebody that's threatening to shoot someone. Do you want to come with me?" And so he does. And he goes to find, there's a threat made about this young kid that Captain Hill knows, and it's a hothead kid. And they go to his house looking for him because he's threatened to go, they've got a warrant for him, and he's threatened to go shoot up his girlfriend's house. They get there, the girlfriend's gone. She goes on a double date, so that really makes him mad. So he hides in the bushes. He hides in the bushes with a Colt 1911 and waits until they come back, and he's going to shoot the guy that she's with. Well, they get into a gunfight because those guys have guns, and he ends up getting shot. One of the other guys gets killed, and one of the other ones gets wounded, and so it's a shootout. And so they have to chase him down. They eventually find him and bring him back to the house, and he's dying. And he said he's talking to Captain Hill, and they're having this conversation about life. And he says, "We failed you. Somehow we failed you. The church failed you. Your parents failed you. I failed you. you should have been given a different life, a chance at a better life. And the kid is repentative, and he dies. And then later on, he goes to do the burial service of that kid. Something I've always thought was a very fitting way to just have his ministry just being totally bound together. He's the arresting officer, and then he goes on to preside at the kid's burial service. I hope I put this in here, but he wrote what is currently the Ranger Prayer. So I'll end it with this. O God, whose end is justice, whose strength is all our stay, be near and bless my mission as I go forth today. Let wisdom guide my action, let courage fill my heart. And help me, Lord, in every hour to do the ranger's part. Protect when danger threatens, sustain when trails are rough. Help me to keep my standard high and smile at the rebuff. When the night comes down upon me, I pray thee, Lord, be nigh, whether a lonely scout or camped under the Texas sky. So, the life of 3 Texas pistol-packing preachers. So.